You're actually pathetic, you know that? A worthless, broke loser. That's what I married.
Some men just aren't built for a life like this. Let's get you somewhere better.
Try not to embarrass yourself on the way out.
You have messed with the wrong person.
The champagne glass never even touched my hand. It went straight into Sophia's, poured by a man whose watch alone cost more than the house we lived in. "You're actually pathetic, you know that?" Sophia said it loud enough for 3 tables to hear, tilting her head toward Jax like he was the punchline to a joke and I was the setup. "A worthless, broke loser. That's what I married." She laughed. Jax laughed with her, one hand already resting low on her back, guiding her away from me and toward the velvet ropes at the far end of the Grand Dragon Casino. People turned to look. Some smirked. A woman near the bar actually pulled out her phone like she wanted to record it. I stood there in my $200 suit, the one Sophia had complained about for a week before we flew out here, and I let them all see exactly what they expected to see. A man frozen, humiliated, small. It took less than 2 minutes. That's all it took for 11 years of marriage to get rewritten in front of a room full of strangers. Worthless, broke, loser. 3 words, and she walked off on the arm of a stranger like I was something she'd finally scraped off her shoe. Here's the part nobody in that casino knew. The part Sophia herself didn't know. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry, not the way they thought. The second the VIP elevator doors swallowed the 2 of them, I turned around, walked calmly past the roulette tables, out through the smoking exit, and into the alley behind the building, where the air smelled like exhaust and cheap cigarettes. I reached up and peeled the wedding ring off my finger, a fake tungsten, bought 2 weeks ago for $11, and dropped it into my jacket pocket, next to the one that actually mattered. Then I pulled out a phone. Not my regular phone, the one with the cracked case and the dead battery I let Sophia see me carry around like proof of how little money we had. This one was different. Encrypted, military grade, the kind you don't buy at a mall kiosk. I opened a satellite map of the block, and a small red pin blinked steadily over a 60-story tower attached to the casino by a private sky bridge. I am not a desperate husband who just got dumped in a casino. I never was. For the last 4 months, I've been working undercover, hired by a rival syndicate with one very simple, very expensive job. Find the servers where Jax Delacroix launders money for half the criminal networks operating out of Southeast Asia. Not the casino's official books. Those are clean, audited, boring. I needed the other set, the real ones. The ones hidden somewhere in that penthouse tower Jax treats like a personal fortress nobody can touch. I'd studied him for 3 months before I ever set foot in Macau. His routines, his security rotations, the guest list of every gala he's thrown in the last 2 years. And in all that studying, one thing became obvious. Jax doesn't let strangers near his private floors. He barely lets business partners near his private floors. But he has one weakness that never fails, the same weakness that's made him careless with 3 other women before Sophia. He can't resist taking something that used to belong to someone else. So when the case file came across my desk with Sophia's photo in it, my own wife, a woman with expensive taste and a growing resentment toward a husband who couldn't keep up with it, I didn't see a marriage falling apart. I saw a way in. I'm not proud of it. I want to say that clearly because there's a version of this story where I'm the villain. And some nights, staring at the ceiling of whatever safe house I'm renting that month, I believe that version too. But I made a choice a long time ago that the mission comes first, and Sophia's ambition, her hunger for a life bigger than the one I could give her, was never a flaw I needed to fix. It was a door. And tonight, she just walked through it, straight into Jax's arms, straight into that private elevator, straight toward the 60th floor, where I needed to be standing in less than 24 hours. I slid the encrypted phone back into my jacket, took one last look at the glowing tower where my wife had just vanished with another man, and allowed myself something I hadn't felt in months. Not heartbreak, not rage, relief. The mission had just gotten easier. All I had to do now was follow her in. 15 minutes after I watched my wife disappear into a private elevator with another man, I was crouched behind a laundry cart in the basement of the Grand Dragon Casino, wearing a stolen floor technician coverall 2 sizes too big. The real technician was tied up in a supply closet 3 doors down, gagged with his own uniform tie, not hurt, just inconvenienced for the next 6 hours. I'd swapped his ID badge for one I'd printed myself, good enough to fool a badge reader, but not good enough to survive a supervisor's second glance. I didn't plan on being down here long enough for a second glance. The basement of a casino this size is its own city. Pipes overhead thick as tree trunks, carrying water to 600 rooms. Server racks humming behind locked steel doors. Maintenance tunnels wide enough to drive a golf cart through, connecting the casino floor to the private tower where Jax kept his real life, the one that never showed up on a brochure. My job tonight wasn't money. It never was. Every chip on that casino floor upstairs was a distraction, a shiny toy for tourists. What I needed was buried in cable, not currency, a physical access point into Jax's private network, something that would let me trace exactly where his servers lived and what they were talking to. I found it behind a panel marked Electrical, Do Not Enter, which in my experience is the universal sign language for exactly where the interesting stuff is kept. Inside was a tangle of fiber lines feeding up into the tower. I pulled a small device out of my sleeve, a custom hardware tap built by a friend of mine who used to work for an actual intelligence agency before he decided freelancing paid better, and clipped it gently onto the primary line without cutting anything, without triggering anything. A parasite, feeding quietly. Data started scrolling across the small screen in my palm almost immediately. Encrypted traffic, mostly, gibberish to anyone without the right keys, which I didn't have yet. But metadata doesn't lie, and metadata was exactly what I needed first. Which rooms were active, which devices were talking to which servers, and most importantly, where certain people were, right now, inside that tower. It took under 3 minutes to find her. Sophia's phone, the one I'd insisted on buying her for her birthday 6 months ago, a gift she'd rolled her eyes at because it wasn't the brand she wanted, was still broadcasting its location through the hotel's internal comms network. A blinking dot, moving upward through the building, floor by floor. 12, 20, 35. It stopped climbing at the 60th floor and stayed there. The penthouse. Jax's private suite, the one occupying the entire top floor of the tower, the one no employee below director level was even allowed to reference by name. I felt something twist in my stomach that I hadn't accounted for. Not jealousy, I told myself that, at least, but something close to it. A small, ugly voice reminding me that no matter how much of tonight was a mission, Sophia had walked upstairs with a stranger's hand on her back, and some part of the man standing in this basement had actually married her because he loved her. Once, before all of this started. I shut that voice down the way I'd been trained to. There wasn't room for it tonight. I kept tracing the network instead, walking the tap's data back through router after router, watching the architecture of Jax's private empire lay itself out on my little screen like a map of veins under skin. And then I found what I'd actually been sent here for. A separate node. Isolated. Not connected to the hotel's guest network, not connected to the casino's official servers, running on its own dedicated line that fed directly into one room and one room only. The master terminal, 60th floor. I zoomed the schematic in further and felt my pulse pick up in a way it hadn't since I'd taken this job. Plugged directly into that terminal, according to the device activity log scrolling past me, was a piece of hardware Jax never let out of his sight. A flash drive, Cold storage, air-gapped from the internet on purpose so nobody could reach it remotely. Years of laundering routes, shell companies, names of people who paid Jax to make their dirty money disappear, and names of people whose money Jax made disappear against their will. Everything the syndicate that hired me wanted, sitting in a drive smaller than my thumb, plugged into a terminal inside a room my own wife was currently locked inside of, with a man who thought he owned her. I unclipped the tap, tucked it back into my sleeve, and allowed myself a small, humorless smile in the dark of that basement corridor. Jax had made one mistake tonight, without even realizing it. He'd pulled Sophia into the one place on Earth I needed access to more than anywhere else, and he'd done it out of nothing but greed and ego. The same greed and ego that was about to end his entire empire. I peeled off the stolen coverall, folded it under my arm, and started walking toward the service stairwell that led up toward the tower. 24 hours. That's all the time I had before my window closed. 24 hours to get eyes inside that penthouse and figure out exactly how I was going to get my wife to steal something for me without ever telling her why. 24 hours changes a person faster than most people want to admit. I know this because I watched it happen to Sophia through a cracked feed on my laptop, sitting in a surveillance van 3 streets away from the tower, parked between a noodle stall and a shuttered pawn shop. The dream she'd walked into last night. Champagne, a penthouse view, a man who could buy her anything she pointed at, had already started curdling into something else by the second evening. I'd tapped the suite's internal comms the moment I confirmed her location, patching into the intercom system Jax used to speak to his staff without ever leaving his chair. It wasn't full video, not yet, just audio and door sensor logs, but it was enough. Enough to hear Jax's voice shift from charming to clipped somewhere around hour 18. Enough to hear him asking Sophia questions that had nothing to do with romance. "Why do you keep looking at my desk?" he'd asked her, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "I wasn't," she'd said, too fast. He hadn't believed her. I didn't blame him. Sophia has never been good at hiding curiosity, which is exactly the trait that made her useful to me, and exactly the trait that was about to get her locked in a room. By the second evening, according to the door logs scrolling across my screen, Jax had moved her from the main suite into the master bedroom and set 2 guards outside it. Not staff, not decoration. Real men, armed, standing at ease the way people stand when they're used to violence being an option and not a last resort. Jax himself left the tower 40 minutes later, according to the elevator logs, heading down to a private car that would take him to the docks, a shipment coming in tonight that needed his personal signature, according to the fragments of conversation my tap picked up as he walked past the intercom relay. Which meant, for the next several hours at least, Sophia was alone in that room, guarded, trapped, and completely unaware that the man she'd humiliated in front of a casino floor was sitting 3 streets away with a direct line into her prison. I didn't hesitate long before opening the channel. I want to be honest about that. Some part of me wanted to sit there a little longer, let her sit with the fear a bit more, let the reality of what she'd traded me for really settle into her chest. That's not a version of myself I'm proud of either. But I opened the channel anyway, because the mission clock was running, and because underneath 4 months of undercover discipline, there was still a man who didn't actually want his wife finished. "Sophia." I heard her breath catch through the small speaker feed, heard fabric rustle like she'd sat upright fast. Who is this? How are you?" "It's me," I said, and let that sit for a second before I said anything else, giving her exactly enough time to recognize my voice and disbelieve it in the same breath. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You don't know anyone who could." "I know a lot of things you don't know about me, Sophia. We don't have time for that conversation right now. We have a different one to have." Her voice cracked when she spoke again, all the confidence from the casino floor gone, replaced by something smaller and more honest. "He's changed. Since last night. He looks at me like Like I'm a problem now. What did I walk into? You walked into a man who eliminates problems, I said, and I let the words land exactly as harsh as they sounded, because she needed to hear them without softening. Jax doesn't keep women who ask questions, Sophia. He keeps them until they stop being useful, and then he makes sure they can't talk about what they saw. You've seen enough already. He knows it. That's why there are 2 men standing outside your door right now instead of room service. The silence on the line stretched long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. You're going to help me, she finally said. Not a question, a demand, threaded through with the kind of desperation that makes people believe things they'd never believe under normal circumstances. I'm going to give you a choice, I said. There's a terminal in the main room, the one Jax works from. Plugged into it is a small black flash drive, cold storage casing, about the size of your thumb. You take that drive and bring it to me, and I will get you out of that building tonight. I have already got eyes on the internal locks. I can unlock the service elevator on the east side the moment you're clear of the bedroom door. And if I don't? I didn't answer that one directly. I let the silence do it for me, the same way Jax's guards outside her door were doing it for him. Sophia, I said instead, softer now. You have maybe 3 hours before he's back. That's the window. Take it or don't, but I need you to decide right now. I heard her crying quietly on the other end, the sound of someone realizing exactly how alone they actually were. Okay, she finally said. Okay, tell me what to do. Rain hit the ferry terminal in sheets, turning the concrete platform into a sheet of black glass under the sodium lights. I stood near a shuttered ticket counter with my collar up, watching the entrance where I'd told Sophia to meet me, running through contingencies in my head the way I always did before an exchange. Best case, worst case, and the 3 or 4 cases in between that actually happen. She came through the doors soaking wet, her expensive dress ruined, mascara tracked down both cheeks, clutching a small black object against her chest, like it was the only solid thing left in her world. She saw me and broke into a run, and for one unguarded second, I watched her face do something I hadn't expected. Relief. Real relief. The kind that comes right before someone throws their arms around a person they trust. I didn't let her get that far. The drive, I said, holding out my hand before she could close the last few feet between us. She stopped, like she'd hit glass. What? Give me the drive, Sophia. Her arms had already been rising to wrap around me, and I watched them freeze halfway, watched confusion bleed into something colder as she actually looked at my face for the first time since walking in. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't relieved. I was a man doing a job, and she was starting to understand that in real time. You're not even going to... She started, and stopped herself, jaw tightening. She held the drive out, and I took it with the same efficient calm I'd use signing for a package. I pulled a manila envelope from my jacket and pressed it into her hands in exchange. A fake passport under a name that had never existed until 3 days ago. A stack of cash thick enough to disappear on for a while, and a slip of paper with an address in it she wasn't going to need for at least a few hours. This gets you out of Macau tonight, I said. Don't use your real name again. Not at the airport, not at a hotel, not to a stranger who buys you a drink. You understand? You planned this, she said quietly, and it wasn't a question either. The same way her demand 3 hours ago hadn't been a question. Before the casino, before any of it, you planned all of it. I didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that would have made either of us feel better, and because right then, over her shoulder, I saw 4 shapes moving fast through the terminal entrance behind her, black jackets soaked through, weapons already drawn from beneath them. Jax's enforcers. Move, I said, grabbing Sophia's wrist before she could ask another question, hard enough that she gasped. She hadn't seen them yet. I had, and I already knew exactly why they were here 3 hours faster than they should have been. He hadn't noticed the drive was missing first. He'd tracked her phone. That birthday gift I'd bought her, the one she'd complained wasn't the right brand. It had a location chip in it that predated tonight by 6 months, one I'd installed myself back when I still thought I might need to find her the ordinary way, if the mission ever went sideways in a different direction than this. Jax's people must have pulled the same signal off the hotel's network that I had, and instead of asking Jax's permission first, they'd simply followed the blinking dot straight to the ferry terminal. We'd both been careless in different ways. I hadn't accounted for how fast they'd move once they realized their guest had left the building unescorted. Sophia hadn't accounted for the fact that everything she owned might be compromised, including gifts from a husband she thought was too broke to matter. The first shot cracked off the terminal's steel roof supports, more warning than aim, but it was enough. Sophia screamed, and I hauled her sideways behind a support pillar as a second shot chipped concrete inches from where her head had been a half-second earlier. "We're burnt," I muttered, mostly to myself, my mind already running past the fear and into the math. 4 men, 1 exit they were blocking, a platform edge dropping down onto the wet loading docks 8 feet below. I pulled a compact pistol from my ankle holster, not standard equipment for a broke, worthless husband, a detail Sophia's wide eyes clearly registered even through her panic, and fired twice at the overhead light rig instead of at the men themselves. Sparks rained down and the terminal dropped into flickering half-darkness, screams from bystanders adding cover to the chaos. "Don't let go of me," I said, and she didn't, her fingers digging into my forearm hard enough to bruise as I pulled her toward the platform's edge. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the rain and the shouting behind us. "Down," I said, and jumped, dragging her with me into the dark beneath the terminal, into water and shadow and whatever came next, the drive already sealed inside my jacket, the only thing in this entire night that had actually gone according to plan. The motel room smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke that had soaked into the walls long before either of us arrived. A single bulb flickered overhead, and the air conditioner rattled like it was fighting for its life in the corner. Sophia sat on the edge of a bed with a cracked headboard, still in her ruined dress, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at me like I was a stranger who'd stolen her husband's face. Which, in a way, I had. We hadn't spoken much on the taxi ride across the bay to Taipei village, both of us soaked and shaking from adrenaline, both of us aware that the silence between us had turned into something with teeth. She'd waited until we were behind a locked door, away from cameras and eyes, to finally let it out. "Who are you?" Her voice wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. Flat, exhausted, stripped of the performance she'd worn at the casino 2 nights ago. 11 years, and I don't even know your real job. I don't know if Marcus is even your real name." "It's real," I said quietly, which was true, even if very little else about the last 4 months had been. "Then what was all of this?" She gestured at the room, at me, at the rain still streaking the window.
"The broke husband act, the cheap suits, the excuses about money every time I wanted something better. Was any of that real? Or was I a prop the whole time?"
I sat down in the room's only chair, across from her, and I gave her the truth, because I'd decided somewhere over the water, dragging her out from under gunfire, that she'd earned at least that much. "I've known for a while that you wanted out," I said. "Not out of loving me, out of the life. The apartment, the budget, the vacations we couldn't afford. I saw it building for over a year before this job ever landed on my desk. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's the reason this worked." Her face went pale under the flickering bulb. "You picked Jax's casino on purpose. You picked that trip." "I suggested it," I said. "You picked the rest yourself, the moment you saw him." "You used me." She said it slowly, like she was testing whether the words could actually be true. "You knew I'd leave with him. You counted on it." I did. I watched something break behind her eyes. Not the dramatic kind of breaking, not tears. She'd already cried herself dry on the ferry platform. This was quieter, colder. the kind of break that happens when a person realizes the ground they thought they understood was never solid to begin with. So the marriage was real, I said, and meant it, even though I understood exactly how little that would matter to her right now. The job came later. I didn't marry you to use you. I used what was already breaking, because I'm good at my job, and my job needed exactly what you were already becoming. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, a moped buzzed past on the wet street, and somewhere below us, a dog barked twice and went quiet. "I hate you," she finally said, without much heat behind it, more like a fact she was still getting used to saying out loud. "I know," I said, and turned to the small rig I'd set up on the room's cracked table. Laptop, cables, and the flash drive I'd taken off her 3 hours ago at the ferry terminal, now sitting under a small magnifying lamp while I worked a set of tools around its casing. I plugged it into an isolated reader, one with no internet connection at all, because I already suspected what I was dealing with, and I wasn't about to risk triggering anything by rushing. The moment the drive registered, a small screen lit up with a countdown, red digits ticking downward from a number that made my stomach drop. 47 hours, 58 minutes, and 3 seconds. 47 hours, 58 minutes, and falling. "What is that?" Sophia asked, some of her anger giving way to curiosity despite herself, drawn toward the glowing numbers the same way she'd been drawn toward Jax's wealth 2 nights earlier. "An auto wipe," I said, running a diagnostic scan across the casing while I answered her. Cold storage like this, built for a man as paranoid as Jax, isn't just encrypted. It's rigged to erase itself if the wrong key gets entered, or if the clock runs out before the right one does. "So unlock it." "It's not a password," I said, feeling the weight of the problem settle into my chest even as I said it out loud for the first time. "It's biometric, a physical scan. Fingerprint, most likely, cross-checked against a second factor I haven't identified yet." "Meaning what?" I looked up from the screen, at the ticking countdown, and then at her. "Meaning the only fingerprint that opens this drive belongs to a man who currently wants both of us finished," I said. "And I have less than 48 hours to get it off him." 41 hours left on the clock when I set the trap. I built it the same way I'd built everything else on this job, using the one weakness Jax couldn't help but act on: his pride. A man like Jax doesn't send subordinates to finish something he considers personal, and by now, this was personal. So I leaked a location, careful and deliberate, through a burner signal designed to look like Sophia's phone had come back online against her will. A defunct shipping container yard just across the Zhuhai border, isolated enough that nobody would hear gunfire, exposed enough that I could see him coming from half a mile away. I told myself it would work because I understood him. What I didn't fully account for was how much he'd wanted to understand me back. He showed up in the gray hour before dawn, headlights cutting through fog rolling off the water. 4 hitmen fanned out around a black SUV like an honor guard for a funeral he intended to host personally. I watched from the crane gantry above the yard, 40 feet up, rain jacket zipped against the cold, rifle-mounted flashbang steady in my grip. Jax stepped out last, unhurried, wearing a coat too clean for a place this filthy, and he didn't scan the containers like a man walking into an ambush. He looked almost bored. "I know you're up there," he called out, voice carrying easily across the empty yard. "I've known for 2 days, actually. Ever since my men pulled your service record off a contact in Manila who owed me a favor." My finger paused on the trigger. That wasn't supposed to be possible yet. "You're not half as invisible as you think you are," he continued, hands in his coat pockets, still scanning nothing in particular. "I let you have the drive at the ferry terminal, you know. I could have had my men shoot both of you the second you hit that platform. I wanted to see how far you'd run with it first." It was a lie, stitched together to shake me, and it almost worked. Except I understood something Jax didn't. A man who genuinely controls the board doesn't need to announce it out loud from the middle of an empty shipyard at 4 in the morning. He was talking because he was uncertain, filling silence the way scared men do when they mistake noise for control. I fired the flashbang. It detonated low over the container stacks, a white flare of sound and light that dropped two of his men to their knees, hands over their ears, disoriented enough that neither got a shot off before I was already moving, sliding down a rope line I'd rigged the night before, boots hitting wet concrete hard. The third man recovered fast enough to swing a rifle toward me. I put him down with a leg sweep and two hard strikes before he found his balance, took his weapon before it hit the ground, and turned it on the fourth man just long enough to buy myself 3 seconds. Enough time to close the distance to Jax himself, who'd finally stopped talking and started reaching for something under his coat. I got there first. We went down together between two rusted containers, the fight nothing like the clean fistfights in movies. Elbows, knees, a headbutt that split my lip open, his fingers clawing for my eyes at one point with a desperation that told me everything I needed to know about how much control he actually had left. He was strong, stronger than I'd expected from a man who ran an empire mostly through other people's violence instead of his own. But he'd never had to fight for his life before. I had, more times than I could count. I drove my knee into his ribs hard enough to hear something give, pinned his arm against the rusted steel container wall, and pressed the drive's small scanner window flat against his thumb before he could pull free. A soft chime confirmed the read. The countdown on my screen, folded into my jacket pocket, froze at 38 hours and 41 minutes, then began scrolling green text instead of red digits. Decrypted. Jax bucked underneath me, screaming something in a language I didn't recognize, fury replacing whatever calm act he'd been performing from the SUV. His remaining man had shaken off the flashbang enough to raise his weapon again, and I didn't wait to see how good his aim was. I drove an elbow into Jax's jaw, hard enough to end the fight, rolled off him, and put 2 rounds into the concrete near the last hitman's feet, close enough to send a message, not close enough to commit a crime I didn't need. He scattered toward the fog, dragging his half-conscious partner with him. Jax lay on the wet concrete, blood on his mouth, staring up at me with something that had finally, fully replaced his earlier calm. Fear. "You don't understand what you just did," he said, voice ragged. "That drive doesn't just end me. It ends people who are far more patient than I am." "Good," I said, tucking the now decrypted drive back into my jacket, already walking away toward the tree line where my car was waiting. "Then they can wait in line behind you." 2 days after the shipyard, I walked into the Hong Kong High Court precinct, wearing a suit that actually fit, no fake wedding ring in my pocket, no cover story left to maintain. It felt strange, almost weightless, the way a person feels after setting down something heavy they'd carried so long they'd forgotten it was a burden at all. The prosecutor, who met me in a small, windowless room on the 4th floor, introduced herself as Deputy Prosecutor Chen, mid-50s, sharp eyes, the kind of quiet exhaustion that comes from spending a career chasing men like Jax and rarely catching them. She didn't ask me who I worked for. I think she already knew better than to ask questions she wasn't cleared to hear the answers to. I set the decrypted drive on the table between us. "Everything's on there," I said. "Shell companies across 9 countries, wire routes disguised as casino winnings, names of at least 14 government officials taking payments to look the other way on shipments coming through the docks, and a separate folder, trafficking manifests, dated back 6 years, disguised as hospitality staffing contracts." Chen didn't touch the drive right away. She looked at it the way you'd look at something that might detonate, which, in a sense, it already had. "You understand what happens once we open this," she said. "I'm counting on it." It took her team less than 3 hours to verify enough of the drive's contents to move. I sat in a waiting room, drinking bad coffee, watching a wall-mounted television flip between local news channels, and by the 2nd hour, the story had already started breaking. Grand Dragon Casino's accounts frozen pending investigation, armed units seen entering the tower, Jax Delacroix's whereabouts unknown following his disappearance from a private event 2 nights earlier. By the 3rd hour, an international arrest warrant had been filed, his name attached to charges that would follow him into whatever hole he tried to crawl into for the rest of his life. Frozen accounts, seized properties, a syndicate that had operated in plain sight for over a decade, gutted in an afternoon, because one man had made the mistake of underestimating exactly who he was dealing with. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel when Chen finally came back into the room to tell me the raids were underway. Not triumph, not quite. Something closer to relief. The same relief I'd felt standing in that alley outside the casino on night one. Except heavier now, weighted down by everything that had happened between then and now. "There's one more thing," I said before she could dismiss me. "The woman who took the drive off Jax's terminal, Sophia." Chen's expression didn't change, but I could tell she'd been waiting for me to bring this up. "Your wife." "She didn't know what she was carrying," I said. "She took it because I told her to, because I gave her a reason that had nothing to do with any of this. A woman terrified for her life, doing what someone she trusted told her to do to survive. She's not part of Jax's organization. She's not part of mine either. She's a civilian who got caught in the middle of something she never asked for." "You want her protected?" "I want her name kept out of every filing that comes off this drive," I said. "Witness protection if it comes to that, a clean record, whatever it takes so she isn't the one sitting in a cell while men who actually built this operation cut deals for lighter sentences." Chen studied me for a long moment, the kind of look that measures a person against everything they've already done to earn or lose trust. "That's an unusual request from a man who used her to get inside that building in the first place." She wasn't wrong, and I didn't pretend otherwise. "It's the least unusual thing about this entire case," I said. "I built this whole operation around a woman who trusted the wrong thing in me. I can live with what that makes me. I can't live with her paying for it in a courtroom for something she never chose to be part of." Chen didn't answer right away. She pulled a folder toward her instead, the kind with a government seal stamped across the top corner, and began writing something inside it, while I sat there and let the silence stretch. "Her name goes into the witness registry," she finally said, sliding the folder shut. "Clean identity, relocation assistance, no charges filed against her, provided she doesn't return to testify against her own interest later and complicate things. That's the best I can offer, and it's more than most people in her position get." "It's enough," I said, and meant it. I stood to leave, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in months, though not entirely gone. Outside the precinct windows, Hong Kong's skyline stretched out gray and endless under a sky that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to rain, and somewhere out there, Jax's world was collapsing, floor by floor, the same way mine had once collapsed on a casino floor 6 days ago. Except his collapse came with handcuffs waiting at the end of it, and mine had only ever been an act. For the first time since this job started, I let myself think about what came after. Not the mission, not the drive, not the syndicate that had hired me. Just the quiet, uncertain shape of whatever life was left standing once all of this finally finished. 2 days after I walked out of the prosecutor's office, I met Sophia one last time in the departures hall of Czech Lapkok Airport, standing beneath a departure board that listed a flight to North America under a name that wasn't hers anymore. She looked different already. Not just the new haircut, shorter, darker, meant to help her disappear into a life nobody would trace back to Macau. Something in the way she carried herself had changed too, like the version of her that laughed on Jax's arm 2 casino floors above me had been folded up and put away somewhere she hoped she'd never need to unpack it again. "You came," she said, when she saw me by the coffee kiosk near her gate. "I said I would." She glanced around the concourse out of habit before stepping closer, a habit I recognized because it was mine, the same instinct that scans a room before trusting it. 4 days of running does that to a person. It had taken me years to build that reflex. It had taken her 4 days. "They gave me everything," she said. "New passport, new name, a clean record, like none of this ever happened. Chen's office said that was your doing." It was the least I could do. "The least you could do," she repeated, something bitter creeping back into her voice, though not as sharp as it had been in that motel room 3 nights ago. "You still haven't actually apologized to me, you know. Not once. Not for the wire, not for the drive, not for using me as bait for a man who wanted me gone by the end of the week." "I'm not going to pretend I didn't do it on purpose," I said. An apology built on top of a lie wouldn't mean anything to either of us. She was quiet for a moment, watching travelers stream past us toward security. Ordinary people with ordinary problems, completely unaware that 2 feet away from them stood a woman starting an entirely new life and a man who'd engineered the reason why. "I keep thinking about the money," she finally said. "The bounty, from turning over what was on that drive. Chen mentioned something about a payout, that some of it might come my way too, since I'm the one who actually walked it out of that penthouse." "You'll get a portion. It's already arranged." "So we could—" She stopped herself, then pushed through it anyway, like she needed to say the thought out loud, even if she already suspected how it would land. "We survived this together, Marcus. All of it. The casino, the ferry, that motel room where I found out everything about you was a lie. We came out the other side of it. Doesn't that count for something? We could start over somewhere new, both of us, with actual money this time. No more pretending to be broke. No more secrets between us." I looked at her for a long moment before I answered. And in that moment, I thought about the version of myself that had married her 11 years ago, before any of this, before case files and rival syndicates and encrypted phones. A version of me that might have said yes to exactly what she was offering. But that man had watched something in the last week that this version of me couldn't unsee. "2 nights ago at that casino," I said quietly, "before any of this started, you didn't know I was undercover. You didn't know about the mission or the drive or any of it. As far as you knew, I was exactly who I'd always shown you. A husband who couldn't keep up financially, struggling, ordinary. And the second a man with money smiled at you, you called me worthless in front of a room full of strangers and walked away on his arm without looking back." Her face went pale, whatever hope had been building behind her eyes starting to fold in on itself. "That wasn't the mission talking," I continued. "That was you. That was real. I built an entire operation around the fact that I already knew that's what you'd do, and I was right. And I don't say that to hurt you further. I say it because it's the reason I can't get on that plane with you." "That's not fair," she whispered. "You manipulated the whole situation." "I did," I agreed, "but I didn't manipulate what was already true about what you'd choose, given the option. I just gave you the option early." She didn't have an answer for that, not one she was willing to say out loud, standing in an airport concourse with a boarding pass clutched in her hand and a flight leaving in 40 minutes. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a final envelope, the last of it, clearance papers confirming her new identity was fully processed, all threads connecting her to Jax's case severed and sealed. "Everything you need is in there," I said, pressing it into her hands. "A clean start, no one looking for you, no one who'll ever connect Sophia Reyes to whatever name is printed on that boarding pass." "And you?" she asked, voice thinner now. "What happens to you?" "I go back to work," I said. "Somewhere else, someone else's mess to untangle." I turned and walked away before she could say anything else, before either of us could turn this into something neither of us actually wanted, a reconciliation built on a week of gunfire and betrayal instead of anything real. Behind me, I heard her call my name once, and then the noise of the terminal swallowed it, and I didn't look back to see whether she was still watching me go. A week after I watched Sophia's flight climb into the grey Hong Kong sky, I found myself sitting outside a small cafe overlooking the Atlantic in Lisbon, a cup of coffee going lukewarm in front of me, while the ocean did its slow, endless work against the rocks below. The job was closed. Officially closed. The kind of closed that comes with a wire transfer instead of a handshake. The bounty for Jax's downfall routed through 3 shell accounts before landing in a legal trust under a name that actually belonged to me. No aliases attached to it this time. My record, as far as any government database was concerned, was clean. No warrants, no flags, nothing connecting the man drinking coffee in Lisbon to the one who'd bled on rusted shipping containers in Zhuhai 2 weeks earlier. I'd read the news online that morning, the way I did every morning now, out of habit more than necessity. Jax's case had moved fast once the drive's contents went public. 3 of the 14 officials named in it had already resigned. 1 had been arrested at his own resignation press conference, which struck me as almost funny in a bleak sort of way. Jax himself was being held without bail, his lawyers making noise about entrapment that nobody in the prosecutor's office seemed particularly worried about, given how thoroughly his own network had turned on him the moment the money stopped flowing. I hadn't heard from Sophia. I didn't expect to. Some silences aren't emptiness. They're just 2 people finally leaving each other alone, the way they should have years earlier, before either of us needed an undercover operation to admit it. I was still thinking about all of that when a shadow fell across my table and a familiar voice cut through the sound of the waves. "You always did pick the tables with the best view and the worst coffee." I looked up, and there was Maya, sliding into the chair across from me like she'd never left, sunglasses pushed up into dark hair that had gone a little grayer at the temples since I'd last seen her in person, 2 years ago on an op in Istanbul that had nearly gotten us both finished. Maya had been my field handler for 5 years before this job, the one who'd talked command out of pulling me from 3 different operations that should have ended badly. The one who'd once dragged me out of a burning warehouse in Prague with a bullet still in her shoulder because she refused to leave without confirming I was actually behind her. She'd read every file on this Macau job before I ever set foot in that casino. She was the only person outside the syndicate who'd known, from day one, exactly what I was walking into and exactly what it might cost me. "You tracked me down," I said, though it wasn't really a question. Maya had never needed much of an invitation to show up exactly when I needed her to. "Wasn't hard," she said, setting 2 train tickets down on the table between us, the paper edge catching the afternoon light. "Coastal line, leaves in 2 hours. Figured you'd want to get out of the city before you started overthinking everything that just happened to you, which, knowing you, is already well underway." I looked down at the tickets, then back up at her, and something in my chest loosened that had been wound tight since the moment Sophia had called me worthless on that casino floor 2 weeks ago. "You heard about Sophia," I said. "I heard about all of it," Maya said, no judgment in her voice, just the flat honesty of someone who'd spent years watching me disappear into other people's lives and come back out the other side changed each time. The marriage, the setup, the way it ended at that airport. You did the job clean, Marcus. You also did it at a cost most people wouldn't have paid. Was it worth it? She considered that for a moment, watching the water instead of me. Jax is in a cell. 14 corrupt officials are unraveling in real time. A trafficking network that's been running for 6 years is being dismantled piece by piece because of what you pulled off that drive. That's worth something, whatever it cost you personally. And personally? Maya finally looked back at me, and there was something steady in her expression that I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. Not admiration exactly, not pity either. Something closer to the quiet respect of someone who'd stood beside me through 5 years of undercover work and never once needed a lie to make that partnership feel real. "Personally," she said, "I think you've spent over a decade building a life around people who needed you to be someone else to want you around. Sophia needed a version of you with money. The syndicates need a version of you with no name at all. I've spent 5 years watching you save my life and risk your own, without ever once needing to pretend to be anybody but exactly who you are." I didn't say anything to that, not right away. I just looked at the 2 train tickets sitting on the table, ordinary and unglamorous, no encrypted phones attached to them, no cover identities, no countdown clocks ticking toward disaster. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I put my phone face down on the table, picked up my coffee, and let it get colder while I actually sat still. Actually let a moment be nothing more than what it was. 2 hours, you said? I asked. Maya smiled, the real kind, not the kind either of us had to perform for a mission. 2 hours, Plenty of time to finish your terrible coffee. Somewhere behind us, the Atlantic kept moving the way it always had, indifferent to casinos and cold storage drives and everything I'd survived to sit at this table. I looked at Maya, at the tickets, at a future that wasn't built on a lie for the first time in years, and for once, I let myself believe it might actually last.